There are places in this world that hide more than secrets. They hide lessons. Lessons about courage. Lessons about truth. Lessons about what happens when someone finally stops living the life others chose for them and begins searching for their own. Rosewood Hall was one of those places. People said it held mysteries. But the real mystery was not in the missing pages of the old ledgers. It was inside the hearts of two women who lived under the weight of silence. Their story teaches us something powerful. When you honor the voice inside you, when you choose growth over fear, you set forces in motion that no one can bury. Part 1. Somewhere in the quiet parishes of central Georgia, there stood a grand plantation house named Rosewood Hall. Local historians avoided it. They spoke of it softly, like a subject too heavy to lift. Old records from 1847 to 1851 were missing entire months. A magistrate had sealed an investigation for 50 years. When the files were finally opened, someone had cut out 12 pages with such care it looked as if the truth had never existed. But truth always leaves a scent. It calls to the people who are ready to hear it. And this story begins with two women who were living lives that others had designed for them. Catherine Harwell was 26 years old. She arrived at Rosewood Hall as a bride, dressed for a future she had not chosen. Her husband, Thomas, was wealthy. His family owned ships in Savannah and acres of cotton fields in central Georgia. The house he built stood tall with white columns that seemed to demand respect. But even a house that large can feel small when your soul is shrinking. Catherine had grown up in Charleston in a family that believed a woman's purpose was simple. She should look pleasant, act gentle, and say little. Her days were shaped by her mother's quiet teachings. A lady should never embarrass herself with strong opinions. A lady should remain calm even when her heart is loud. A lady should accept the life she is given. But the truth, as Napoleon Hill would say generations later, is that every person must create their own purpose if they wish to truly live. Catherine did not yet know this truth. But the emptiness inside her was the first sign that her soul was asking for something more. Rosewood Hall was beautiful on the outside and silent on the inside. Thomas traveled often for business. The rooms were large, the ceilings high, and the days long. Catherine spent many afternoons staring at the countryside from the upstairs window, wondering why a woman could have everything she was told to desire and still feel as though nothing belonged to her. A person's life can begin falling apart in silence. But it can also begin changing in silence. Catherine's change began the day she walked into the kitchen house. The kitchen house stood 30 yards from the main residence. It was warm, loud, busy. It smelled like bread rising, stew simmering, and wood burning. And inside it moved a woman named Delphine, whose strength was not loud but steady. She had been born on the plantation. She had learned the art of cooking from her mother. She carried her skill like armor. In a world where she had control over almost nothing, the kitchen was the one place where her choices mattered. Delphine woke before dawn, built the fires, directed the younger workers, and prepared meals for the big house. She lived her life under someone else's rule. But inside her heart there was a discipline and clarity that reminded Catherine of something she did not yet have. Delphine's movements had purpose. Her mind was sharp. Her presence was calm. And Catherine, without fully understanding why, began returning to the kitchen house more often. At first she told herself it was to learn household management. But the truth was deeper. People are naturally drawn toward the place where their soul feels awake. And for Catherine, the kitchen house smelled like possibility. The first meaningful conversation happened on a hot September afternoon. Catherine entered with a notebook to discuss a dinner menu. She found Delphine shaping dough with steady hands. Something about the rhythm of the work quieted Catherine's thoughts. She watched for longer than she intended. "Did your mother teach you?" Catherine asked softly. Even she realized her question was unusual. In that world, people avoided speaking to enslaved workers in ways that suggested they had families, memories, or hopes. But something inside Catherine had pushed her to ask anyway. Delphine froze just for a moment. She knew when a question carried danger. But she also knew when truth needed air. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. "She taught me everything." Catherine should have stopped there. But when people feel a spark of awakening, even a small one, they often speak without planning to. "Do you miss her?" This time the silence was long. Catherine felt her face warm with embarrassment. She knew she had crossed an invisible line. But Delphine's eyes held a truth that could not be hidden. "Every day, ma'am," she whispered. Catherine left quickly, her heart beating too fast. She tried to tell herself she was only being kind. But kindness did not explain the way her spirit felt pulled forward, as if she had taken a step toward a destiny she did not yet understand. That night she lay beside her sleeping husband, eyes open, thinking of the quiet honesty in Delphine's voice. Thinking of the warmth inside the kitchen house. Thinking of how alive she had felt for a brief moment. This is how change begins. Not with grand decisions, but with a single moment of awareness. A single spark of curiosity. A single voice inside whispering there is more to life than what you are living. Over the next months, Catherine visited the kitchen house often. She brought needlework and sat near the fire. And slowly, one conversation at a time, their connection grew. Not in the way society expected. Not in the way rules allowed. But in the way two human souls recognize each other when one is searching and the other is steady. And whether Catherine understood it or not, she had taken her first step towards something powerful. She had stepped into the beginning of her purpose. And once a person begins that journey, nothing, not silence, not fear, not even society itself, can stop the change that follows. If you want, I can write part 2, 1,000 words, in the same motivational Napoleon Hill style. Engaging hook part 2. Some people believe life is shaped only by the rules we are born into. But Napoleon Hill taught us that every great transformation begins when a person dares to think a new thought. Catherine and Delphine lived in a time when society demanded silence, obedience, and fear. Yet something powerful was growing between them, something that reminded them both of a hidden truth Napoleon Hill often described. When two minds share a deep connection, they create a force strong enough to challenge every barrier around them. And sometimes, that force changes not only a person, but the entire course of their life. Now let us return to Rosewood Hall, where two women were about to discover that the greatest danger in life is not breaking rules, but breaking free from the limits of the mind. Part 2. Catherine continued visiting the kitchen house, unaware that every step she took toward that warm little building was also a step toward an inner awakening she had never imagined for herself. She spoke about Charleston and her sisters, about the books she had secretly read when her father was not paying attention, and about the dreams she had once allowed herself to believe in. And as she spoke, she began to reveal the most important truth a person can uncover. She realized she had never actually lived for herself. Delphine listened carefully. She replied with safe topics at first, just enough to stay within the rules that protected her life. She talked about cooking techniques, about the rhythm of the plantation, about the daily routines that shaped her world. But the human mind, as Hill explained, is always seeking connection. And soon, their conversations grew deeper. Words became bridges. Silence became understanding. Every time Catherine entered the kitchen house, she left behind a little more of the fear that had controlled her life. Catherine confessed something she had never dared say aloud. She felt trapped inside a life she had not chosen. She feared she would spend her entire existence serving her husband's ambitions or the expectations of society. She feared her voice would never matter. And when she confessed her loneliness, something powerful happened. The fear she had carried for years began to lose its strength. Hill would say she had taken the first step towards self-mastery by speaking her truth. Delphine listened with a stillness that came from years of survival. She had learned to observe people with extraordinary clarity. She noticed something unusual in Catherine. Unlike other white women she had seen, Catherine was not satisfied with privilege. She was not satisfied with silence. She was not satisfied with pretending everything was fine. Catherine wanted to be understood. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to feel alive. For Delphine, this was dangerous knowledge. Catherine could destroy her without meaning to. A careless word or a misunderstood moment could send Delphine to the auction block or far worse. Yet the human mind, when starved of connection, can take risks the body never would. And Delphine was lonely too. She had watched her family disappear one by one. She had lost people to fever, to death, to sale, to escape, and to silence. She had no equal, no friend, no one who knew her beyond her skill in the kitchen. When Catherine looked at her with curiosity and respect, Delphine felt something shift inside her. The great truth of human nature, as Hill described, is that the desire to be understood is more powerful than fear. And fear, when confronted with the right kind of connection, begins to lose its power. By spring of 1846 they had formed a rhythm that both recognized as dangerous but neither could abandon. Catherine spent hours with Delphine, pretending to supervise the household but really seeking a place where she felt alive. Delphine made special dishes and called them recipe tests, though both knew they were small gifts. Catherine stayed longer each day, and Delphine found herself speaking more freely than she had with anyone in years. Their hands began to touch by accident. Catherine would reach for something. Delphine would steady her. Their fingers brushed and lingered. These small touches created an energy between them. Hill might have called it the beginning of a burning desire. Not desire in the romantic sense alone, but in the sense of two minds recognizing each other deeply. In a world built on silence, they had found a language of their own. The first kiss arrived like a spark in a storm. A thunderstorm rolled across the plantation one afternoon. Catherine sought shelter in the kitchen house. They stood by the window watching the rain. The air felt charged. Catherine turned to Delphine. Delphine saw something written clearly in her expression, something she had been trying not to acknowledge. The moment took them both by the hand. The kiss was gentle, brief, filled with both fear and longing. When they pulled apart, the truth hung between them like the heavy scent of rain. Delphine whispered that they could not continue. Catherine whispered that she no longer cared. And there in the half-dark, they learned the great principle Hill spoke of so often. When emotion mixes with thought, it becomes a powerful force. And once awakened, that force does not easily return to silence. They should have stopped. They knew the risks. They understood the danger. But their need for connection was stronger than fear. Catherine returned again. And then again. Soon she came at night, slipping through shadows to the kitchen house after the world slept. In those hours they created a small world of their own. Catherine read aloud from poetry and novels. Delphine taught Catherine how to knead dough and judge the temperature of a pan with only her hands. They talked until dawn. They laughed softly. They learned one another's thoughts, hopes, fears. They built something that had no name because their world offered no name for it. But the difference in their positions never left Delphine's mind. Catherine could dream of freedom. Delphine could only imagine it. Catherine could pretend the world outside did not exist. Delphine knew the world outside would decide her fate without mercy. The first person to sense the danger was Marcus. He found Delphine staring into the fire with an expression he had never seen. She told him the truth because she had never lied to him. His reaction was immediate. He feared the worst and said so plainly. He reminded her of the cruel lessons life had taught them both. But Delphine's heart had awakened. She had tasted something she did not think existed for her. And once a person discovers such a feeling, turning back becomes almost impossible. By fall of 1846 Catherine was glowing with a happiness she could not hide. The plantation wives noticed. Thomas noticed too, though he misunderstood the source. He believed his wife had finally accepted her role. He believed she had found satisfaction in the routine of plantation life. The truth never entered his mind because the truth did not exist in the world he understood. Then, in November 1846, Thomas's unmarried sister Judith arrived at Rosewood Hall. Sharp-minded, observant, and bitter from years of powerlessness, Judith did not miss much. Catherine and Delphine did not yet realize that their greatest test was about to begin. Would you like me to continue with Part 3 in the same Napoleon Hill motivational style? Engaging Hook Part 3. Some moments arrive in life like a cold wind that blows open a hidden door. Behind that door is the truth you have been avoiding, the truth that forces you to grow. You do not get to choose these moments. They choose you. And when they come, your future depends on how you stand in them. This part of the story is about such a moment. It is about what happens when desire meets fear. When truth meets consequence. When a person must decide whether to protect their comfort or speak from the deepest part of their soul. It is also about the law that Napoleon Hill wrote about many times, the law that says every crisis carries within it a seed. A seed of strength. A seed of power. A seed of transformation. Part 3. Catherine believed she understood the world she lived in. She believed she understood its rules, its expectations, and its dangers. But the truth is that a person often becomes blind to danger when the heart finds something it values more than safety. That is what happened to her. The kitchen house became a place where she felt alive. The presence of Delphine gave her a sense of calm and belonging that she had never known. And like many people who follow a new and powerful desire, she did not see the eyes watching her from a distance. Judith had been raised with the firm belief that order must never be disturbed. She believed that a household only survived when every person stayed in their assigned place. Her mind worked like a strict judge. She did not try to understand. She tried to enforce. And because she trained herself to notice every small change in behavior, she sensed something long before the truth appeared. She saw how Catherine lingered in the kitchen house. She saw Delphine's face soften when Catherine stepped inside. She saw the tiny gestures, the shared glances, the warmth between the two women that was unspoken yet unmistakable. One observation meant nothing. But many small observations formed a pattern. And once Judith saw the pattern, she could not unsee it. Napoleon Hill once wrote that every mind has a controlling belief. Judith's belief was that order must be protected at any cost. Because of this belief, she began to watch Catherine more closely. She appeared in the kitchen house without warning. She asked questions that felt innocent on the surface but were designed to uncover truth. She created situations that would force secrets into the open. She believed she was acting for the good of the household. She never imagined she was unlocking a crisis that would change 3 lives forever. The night of discovery came in early December. The air was sharp and cold. Most of the house slept. Judith could not rest. Something felt wrong. When she looked out the window and saw light burning in the kitchen house long after midnight, she decided to investigate. She told herself she was checking for danger, but deep inside she hoped she might finally confirm her suspicion. When she opened the kitchen house door, the world stood still. Catherine and Delphine were standing close together. Catherine's hand rested on Delphine's face. The gesture was gentle, loving, trusting. It revealed everything without a single word spoken. The 3 women froze. No one breathed. The shock lasted only seconds, but it felt like an entire lifetime pressed into a single moment. Judith's face shifted from confusion to recognition and then to horror. In her mind, everything she feared had come true. Catherine stepped back, pale and trembling. Delphine lowered her eyes, knowing the danger that now hovered above them like a blade. Judith's voice was calm but cold when she finally spoke. Catherine tried to explain, but Judith cut her off. The word she used was sharp enough to wound. Instead of calling it connection or love, she called it corruption. She called it something unclean. With one word, she stripped away the truth and replaced it with shame. Catherine, shaking, begged her not to tell Thomas. But once a person like Judith believes their order has been broken, they act with certainty. She declared that Thomas must know. She declared that Delphine would be removed from the property. Catherine cried out in desperation, revealing in that moment just how deep her feelings truly were. This was the mistake Judith had not expected. Napoleon Hill often wrote that a crisis forces a person to declare who they really are. Catherine did exactly that. When Delphine tried to take the blame, Catherine refused. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but honest. She defended Delphine. She claimed her feelings openly. She spoke with a courage she did not know she had until that moment. Judith looked at her with shock. In Judith's world, such desire was something that could be corrected. It was a temporary weakness. But Catherine was speaking with the conviction of a woman who had found something real. This confused Judith more than anything else. It made the situation larger than she had expected. Judith warned her of consequences. She spoke of disgrace, annulment, punishment, and ruin. She spoke of Delphine being sold far away. Yet Catherine did not back down. She insisted that Delphine was not property but a person. She insisted that what they felt was real. She insisted that even if everything was taken from her, the truth of their connection could not be erased. Judith stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then she left, closing the door behind her with a sound like final judgment. The kitchen house fell silent. Catherine reached for Delphine, desperate to hold on to something before everything collapsed. But Delphine stepped back. She understood something Catherine did not. She knew the power of the world outside that kitchen house. She knew how quickly love could be crushed under fear, law, and control. In that moment, 2 hearts that had found each other now stood on opposite sides of an invisible line. Catherine felt pain. Delphine felt fear. Both understood that their lives had changed forever. This night became a turning point. A crisis. A moment that forced Catherine to discover what she truly valued. And as Napoleon Hill taught, moments like this either break a person or make them stronger. Catherine did not know it yet. But this crisis would shape her destiny. Engaging Hook Part 4. There comes a moment in every life when a person must stand at a crossroads. One road leads back to comfort and safety. The other road leads forward into risk, truth, and the unknown. Napoleon Hill taught that in these moments, destiny does not whisper. It waits. It waits for a decision that separates the ordinary life from the life of purpose. In this part of the story, Catherine stands at such a crossroads. Everything she believes, everything she loves, and everything she fears gathers around her like a storm. And within that storm, she must decide who she is. Not for the world. Not for her family. But for the truth she carries inside. Part 4. Morning arrived slowly, dragging a heavy silence across the plantation. The cold December air felt sharper than usual, as if the world itself sensed that something irreversible had happened. Catherine barely slept. She spent the night pacing the small kitchen house, trying to hold herself together while Delphine stood quietly near the window, staring out at the yard with a look that blended fear with acceptance. Catherine felt the weight of every moment. Her heart was full of love, but her mind replayed Judith's expression, her voice, her threats. For the first time in her life, Catherine understood in a deep and painful way that love alone is not enough to protect someone. Love gives courage, but courage must become action. Napoleon Hill taught that a person must never surrender leadership of their own mind. Catherine knew that if she let fear control her thoughts, then Judith's judgment would shape everything that followed. The sun had barely risen when Judith made her move. She walked into the main house with her chin lifted and her steps crisp, like someone carrying a message she believed would restore order. Thomas sat at the dining table reviewing accounts. He looked up when Judith entered, sensing tension before she even spoke. Catherine stood outside the doorway, unable to breathe, listening to every muffled word. She knew that once Judith's truth was spoken, nothing could be undone. Napoleon Hill often wrote that secrets gain power from silence. Once spoken aloud, they force action. They demand courage. Judith began calmly. She described the late hour. She described the light in the kitchen house. Then she described what she saw. Her voice did not tremble. Her belief in her own righteousness gave her a sense of authority. She believed she was saving the household, protecting her brother, and restoring control. Thomas did not interrupt. He listened without expression. When Judith finished, he lowered his head and sat silently for a long time. Catherine could feel the silence through the doorway like a living thing. Her hands shook. Her knees weakened. She had no idea what he would say. Finally, Thomas spoke. His voice was quiet, controlled, and cold. He did not call Judith a liar. He did not question her story. He simply asked, "Where is Catherine now?" Catherine stepped into the room even before Judith could answer. She stood before her husband with trembling hands but a steady gaze. In that moment, she felt the truth of Napoleon Hill's words. A person's greatest power is the power to control their own mind. Fear lived inside her, but she would not let fear speak for her. She would speak for herself. Thomas looked at her with a face emptied of emotion. Is what she says true? Catherine felt her heartbeat pounding, but she refused to bow her head. She refused to look away. She answered with a voice that carried pain but also clarity. Yes. It is true. Judith gasped softly. She had expected denial. She had expected excuses. She had not expected Catherine's open acceptance. Delphine stood outside the house at the edge of the yard, waiting. Her hands were clasped. Her body was still. She knew her fate was being decided inside that room. Napoleon Hill wrote that every person must sometimes stand in a place where their future rests in another person's hands. But he also taught that inner strength does not depend on circumstance. It depends on spirit. Delphine had spirit. She stood with quiet dignity even as fear pressed against her like a weight. Back inside, Thomas asked, "Why?" He did not shout. His calmness was more frightening than anger. Catherine felt tears rising, but she kept her voice steady. Because she matters to me. Because what I felt with her was real. Because I cannot pretend otherwise. Judith stepped forward, furious. Catherine, stop. Do not make this worse. But Catherine lifted a hand, signaling her to be silent. For the first time, Catherine stood not as a frightened woman but as someone claiming her truth. Napoleon Hill taught that strength begins the moment a person refuses to lie to themselves. Catherine refused to lie anymore. Thomas's face slowly hardened. This household runs on order, he said. My property obeys my command. My wife obeys the expectations of her position. You have crossed a boundary that cannot be repaired. Catherine inhaled sharply. She felt the blow of his words, but she did not shrink. What will you do with her? She whispered. Thomas rose from his chair. His jaw tightened. She will be sold. Catherine's body felt like it was collapsing. Her heart broke with a force that made her grip the table. No, she whispered. Please. Judith placed a hand on Thomas's arm. This must be done, she said. There is no other option. Catherine felt her entire world tilting. But Napoleon Hill taught that the darkest hour is often the moment before transformation. A person must hold faith even when the ground beneath them shakes. She stepped forward and said something no one expected. Then sell me too. The room went silent. Judith stared at her as if she had lost her mind. Thomas was stunned. Catherine continued speaking, her voice trembling but resolute. If she goes, I go. I will not stay in a home built on a lie. I will not live by pretending I feel nothing. She is not my weakness. She is my truth. Thomas's eyes widened with disbelief. He had never seen her like this. He had never seen her speak with such inner power. Catherine realized something at that moment. She had spent years living as someone people expected her to be. But now, she was becoming someone she chose to be. Napoleon Hill wrote that a burning desire can lift a person above their circumstances. Catherine's burning desire was love, loyalty, and truth. That desire gave her the courage to challenge everything she had been taught. Judith stepped back as if the room itself had changed. She could not understand this kind of conviction. She could not imagine choosing truth over position, fear over comfort, love over control. Thomas finally spoke. His voice cracked slightly, betraying emotion he wished to hide. You would abandon your family for this. Catherine nodded. I would not abandon myself. Her words landed like a spark inside the silent room. A spark of identity. A spark of purpose. A spark of strength. Outside, Delphine felt something shift in the air. She did not know what had been said inside, but she felt hope flicker for the first time since the night before. This moment became a turning point. A moment that would decide everything. A moment that would test courage, loyalty, and destiny. And though Catherine stood in danger, she had discovered something more powerful than the fear around her. She had discovered her voice. Engaging Hook Part 5. Every breakthrough in life begins with a moment of decision. Not a loud decision. Not a public decision. But a quiet moment when a person chooses who they will be from this day forward. Napoleon Hill taught that when a person makes a decision with full conviction, the universe bends to honor that choice. In this part of the story, Catherine makes such a decision. And once she does, the world around her begins to shift in ways no one expected. Part 5. The morning after Catherine spoke the words that shook the entire household, Rosewood Hall felt different. The cold air seemed to hold its breath. The servants moved quietly, whispering among themselves, wondering what would happen next. Nothing on the surface looked changed, but beneath every routine task lay a deep tension, like a rope pulled too tight. Catherine stood in her room staring at the small window that faced the kitchen house. Beyond it, she could see Delphine gathering wood for the morning fire. Even in the dim light, Delphine's movements carried the same grace and calm she had always shown. Yet Catherine saw the fear beneath that calm, a fear she knew she had caused by speaking the truth aloud. Napoleon Hill wrote that every great decision must be followed by courage. Without courage, even the strongest decision collapses. Catherine reminded herself of that as she walked toward the kitchen house. Inside, Delphine looked up when she entered. Their eyes met with a depth that said everything words could not. Catherine stepped forward, and for a moment the world around them felt suspended. No master. No hierarchy. No threat. Only two human beings who had found something rare and fragile in the midst of a rigid world. Catherine felt tears build again, but she held them back. She knew Delphine needed clarity, not emotion. We will face whatever comes together, Catherine said softly. I will not leave you to face this alone. Delphine looked away, her voice low. You should not say that. It is dangerous for you. For both of us. Catherine stepped closer. Napoleon Hill taught that fear is a state of mind. And the only way to overcome fear is by choosing a stronger state of mind. I choose strength, she said. I choose you. Delphine shook her head slightly. You do not understand what they can do. You have choices. I do not. Catherine took her hands gently. Then my choices belong to you as well. If you are forced from this place, I will go with you. Delphine's breath caught. She had wanted to believe Catherine's words the day before, but hearing them again, spoken with calm determination, made her heart ache. No one in her life had ever claimed her like that. No one had ever spoken of loyalty, sacrifice, or destiny on her behalf. Napoleon Hill believed that loyalty creates power. In that moment, something powerful formed between them. It strengthened them. It gave Delphine the courage to whisper, I believe you. Their moment was interrupted by footsteps outside. Catherine stepped back as Judith appeared in the doorway with a stiff expression. Her gaze fell first on Delphine, then on Catherine, and she said, Thomas wishes to speak with both of you in the dining room. Delphine's stomach tightened. Catherine reached for her hand for just a second, a reassuring squeeze, before they followed Judith. The walk to the main house felt like a funeral procession. The air was heavy. Even the trees seemed still. When they entered the dining room, Thomas stood by the window with a ledger open but ignored. His face carried a storm of emotions he was trying to hide. Catherine stood tall. Delphine kept her eyes lowered. Thomas began speaking in a voice that felt too calm. I have considered what Judith told me. I have considered what you said. I have also considered what is required to protect this family's name. Judith stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, ready to reinforce his decisions. Thomas continued. Delphine will not be sold. Not yet, Catherine gasped softly. Delphine's eyes lifted in surprise. Thomas went on. I will not act in anger. I will not make a rushed decision that disrupts the estate. But she will be moved. She will be placed under direct supervision. She will no longer work in the kitchen house. She will no longer be allowed near you without permission. Catherine felt panic rise. She took a step forward. Thomas, please. But Thomas raised a hand. You have already said enough? Until I decide what to do with you, you will remain in the house under Judith's watch. Judith stepped closer, her voice tight. This is merciful, Catherine. You should accept it. Catherine clenched her fists. Napoleon Hill taught that every adversity carries a seed of equal or greater benefit. Catherine forced herself to breathe. She realized that resisting now could make things worse. Then Thomas delivered the hardest blow. If I see either of you defy these rules, Delphine will be sent away immediately, and without discussion. Do you understand? Catherine felt her heart fracture. Delphine bowed her head. Yes, sir. Catherine whispered yes. Thomas turned away, signaling that the conversation was over. Judith gestured sharply for Delphine to leave. Catherine watched Delphine walk out of the room, back straight, steps controlled. But she could see the devastation beneath her calm. When the door closed, the silence crushed Catherine. She felt trapped, helpless. But then she remembered something Napoleon Hill wrote. A person's greatest strength does not come from circumstances. It comes from the power of a definite plan. Catherine realized she had no plan. Only emotion. Only fear. Emotion could protect nothing. She needed strategy. She needed vision. She needed to become a woman capable of protecting what she loved. That night, she sat by her window for hours, watching the lights of the yard and the faint glow from the quarters where Delphine had been reassigned. Every part of her wanted to run to her, but she knew that would destroy everything. Napoleon Hill taught that desire backed by persistence becomes a force that cannot be denied. Catherine whispered to the darkness, I will not give up. Not on her. Not on you. As she spoke, something inside her shifted. Her fear softened. Her mind sharpened. Her heartbeat steadied. The flame inside her grew stronger. This was no longer only a story of forbidden affection. It had become a story of purpose. A story of courage. A story of two women standing against a world built to separate them. And Catherine made a promise to herself. She would not allow that world to win. Engaging Hook Part 6. There comes a moment in every person's life when the world grows quiet, as if waiting for your next move. It is the moment when excuses lose their power and your inner voice rises with calm strength. This is the turning point. Not a day on the calendar, not a number on a clock, but a shift inside you. Part 6 begins exactly at that moment, the moment you finally understand that the life you want is not waiting ahead of you. It is waiting within you. Part 6. The day you become unstoppable. The morning sun rose gently over the small town as Daniel stepped outside, feeling the cool air touch his face. For the first time in many months he felt no rush, no anxiety, no heaviness. Instead he felt a quiet strength inside him. A strength he had never truly recognized before. He walked to the old wooden bench under the maple tree behind his house. This was the spot where he had once come to hide from his challenges. Now he came here to face himself. The world around him seemed peaceful. Birds moved across the sky. Trees shifted with the wind. Everything reminded him that life did not need noise to be powerful. Real power was silent. He sat down and closed his eyes. For a long moment he breathed deeply and allowed himself to listen to the silence. He had learned this in the earlier parts of his journey. To build anything strong, you must first build stillness within. It was in this stillness that he understood his greatest lesson. He had spent years fighting fear, distraction, doubt, and the opinions of others. But the real enemy had never been outside. It had always lived in the quiet corners of his own mind. He opened his notebook, the same one that held all his dreams, ideas, and goals. On the first page he had written a sentence that changed everything. My goals are promises, not wishes. Every day since writing that sentence he had tried to live by it. Some days he succeeded. Some days he failed. But every day he tried, and that effort had built something powerful inside him. Now he looked at that sentence again and asked himself a new question. What kind of person keeps every promise they make to themselves? The answer rose inside him with clarity. A disciplined person. A person who does not wait for motivation but builds momentum. A person who does not let emotions decide the direction of their life. A person who leads themselves even when no one is watching. That was the person Daniel was becoming. He turned the page and wrote 3 new commitments. Protect your peace at all costs. Show up even when you do not feel like it. Live every day with purpose and intention. As he wrote the words, he felt the shift happening. He felt something unlock inside him. It was not loud or dramatic. It was calm, steady, and undeniable. It was the feeling of becoming unstoppable. Later that day, Daniel walked through town and noticed things he had never noticed before. People moved with hurry but not with direction. They were busy but not purposeful. He realized that this was how he had lived for most of his life. Running without aim, wanting results without building habits, hoping for change without changing himself. But now he understood something powerful. Results are not created in the future. They are created in the choices you make today. He passed by the bakery where he had once worked as a teenager. He remembered sweeping floors and watching customers choose their pastries while he dreamed silently about a life of freedom and achievement. Those dreams had felt impossible back then. But now he knew the truth. Nothing is impossible once you learn to master yourself. When he reached the town library, he walked inside and greeted Mrs. Turner, the librarian who had always encouraged him. She smiled warmly. You look different, Daniel, she said. More sure of yourself. Daniel did not explain. He simply nodded because he knew this confidence was not a performance. It was the natural result of inner work. True confidence is quiet. It comes from knowing you can trust yourself. He sat at a table near the window and opened his notebook again. He began writing the story of his journey. Not because he wanted praise and not because he wanted others to see how far he had come. He wrote because he wanted to remember something important. Growth does not happen in one big moment. It happens in small decisions repeated with discipline. It happens when you choose progress over comfort. It happens when you choose courage over fear. It happens when you choose to rise one more time even after failing. As he wrote, he thought about the people he would meet in the future. People who would be struggling just like he once had. People who would feel lost or tired or afraid. He hoped he could help them. Not with big speeches or fancy advice, but with the truth he had lived. The truth that every person carries the power to change their life once they stop running from themselves. Hours passed and evening light filled the library. Daniel closed his notebook and placed his hand on top of it. He felt proud not because he had reached the end of a journey but because he had reached the beginning of a new one. The journey of living every day with intention. The journey of leading himself with discipline. The journey of becoming the strongest version of himself. As he stepped outside, he noticed something he had never seen. The town lights glowing softly against the dark sky. He realized that this was exactly how inner strength worked. It did not need attention. It did not shout. It simply shined quietly within you, guiding your steps, reminding you who you are and who you are becoming. On his walk home, he whispered a promise to himself. No matter what challenges come, no matter how uncertain life becomes, I will stay true to my purpose. I will keep showing up. I will keep growing. I will keep walking forward with calm confidence. Because the person who masters themselves becomes unstoppable. When he reached his porch, he paused and looked at the sky. For the first time in his life, he felt completely in control. Not because the world was easy. Not because everything was perfect. But because he now understood the greatest truth of all. Strength comes from within. Peace comes from within. Purpose comes from within. And once you build them inside you, the world can no longer shake you. That night, Daniel slept with a peaceful heart. Not because he had reached the end, but because he had finally become someone he trusted. Someone who could lead himself. Someone who could rise above anything. Someone unstoppable. Engaging Hook Part 7. There is a moment in every rising person's life when the world offers a silent question. Are you willing to grow beyond who you were yesterday? It does not speak in loud voices. It whispers inside your choices, inside your habits, inside the promises you make to yourself. Part 7 begins at the very moment when a person decides that growth is not something that happens someday. Growth is something you build every single day. Part 7. The power of daily growth. The morning light slowly spread across Daniel's room as he sat on the edge of his bed with his notebook open on his lap. He looked at the list of commitments he had written days earlier. Protect your peace. Show up no matter how you feel. Live every day with purpose. These words were not just reminders. They had become the foundation of his new life. But today he felt something different. A deeper understanding was forming inside him. Something he had heard many times but never truly lived. If you want to change your life, you must change your days. He stood up, stretched his arms, and walked to the kitchen. The room was quiet. The world outside was waking up slowly. As he poured himself a glass of water, he thought about how he used to start his mornings. Rushing. Worrying. Checking his phone. Letting the world control his mood before he had even taken his first breath with intention. But now he guarded his mornings like sacred time. He stepped outside and began his morning walk. The same path he had walked for years now felt different because he was different. He paid attention to the wind brushing against his face and the sound of leaves gently moving in the trees. Everything around him felt like a quiet lesson. Life moves forward one small moment at a time. And so do we. As he walked, he thought about a powerful truth he had recently discovered. Most people wait for motivation, but the strongest people build habits. Motivation rises and falls like the tide. Habits stay. So he asked himself an important question. What habits will build the future I want? He remembered something he had read in a book long ago. Successful people are not lucky. They are consistent. They do the small things that others ignore. They train their minds the way athletes train their bodies. Not through one giant effort, but through steady discipline. And in that moment, Daniel understood why he had struggled for so many years. He had chased big moments but ignored small actions. He had dreamed of success but avoided the daily work. He stopped walking and took out his notebook. Right there on the sidewalk, he wrote 3 new habits he wanted to build. First, feed your mind with something positive every morning. Second, spend time each day working on your main goal. Even 10 minutes matters. Third, close each night by reviewing your progress and giving thanks. Just writing these habits gave him a spark of energy. He felt as if he was building a map that would guide him not just for days but for years. He continued walking until he reached the edge of town where an old abandoned barn stood. It had once belonged to a local farmer. Now it stood silent, weathered by time. Most people passed by it without noticing, but today Daniel felt drawn to it. He walked closer and touched the old wooden wall. The barn looked weak from the outside, but the structure was still standing strong. Storms had hit it. Seasons had changed. Yet it still refused to fall. This barn is a lot like a disciplined mind, Daniel whispered to himself. Life will send storms, but if your foundation is strong, you will stand. Inspired by this thought, he sat on a fallen log nearby and closed his eyes. He remembered the times he had collapsed under pressure. Times when fear had made him quit. Times when doubt had made him hesitate. But he also remembered something important. Every time he rose again, he rose a little stronger. This gave him hope. Progress does not need perfection. It only needs persistence. He opened his notebook and wrote a sentence that felt like a breakthrough. Your future is hidden inside your daily routine. As he looked at the words, he realized that his life had changed not because of one big moment, but because of small choices he made consistently. Choices to think better. Choices to act better. Choices to believe in himself even when it was hard. He stood up feeling lighter and continued his walk back toward town. When he passed the bakery, he remembered how he once used to stop there for coffee and a pastry just to feel a small moment of comfort. Now he no longer searched for comfort from food or distractions. He found comfort in growth. It gave him strength. It made him proud. It made him feel alive in a new way. Back at home, he spent the afternoon working on his main goal, a personal project he had avoided for years. It was a dream he had once pushed aside because he thought he was not ready. Now he understood that readiness does not come first. Action comes first. Confidence grows afterward. So he opened his laptop and began typing. The words flowed with surprising ease. For the first time, he felt like the person he always wanted to become. Hours later, he stepped outside and watched the sunset paint the sky. The colors reminded him of something simple yet powerful. Every day ends. Every day begins. But what you do between those two moments determines the quality of your life. As night came, he sat on the porch with his notebook again. This time he reviewed his day. He wrote down one thing he learned, one thing he improved, and one thing he was grateful for. This simple nightly habit made him feel centered and complete. He wrote, I am proud of the person I am becoming. Not because I am perfect, but because I am consistent. This was the truth he had been searching for his entire life. Growth is not about being the best. It is about being better than you were yesterday. Before going inside, he looked up at the sky and felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that life would still bring challenges. There would still be obstacles, mistakes, and moments of doubt. But he also knew that daily growth had given him something far more powerful than certainty. It had given him the ability to rise every single time. Daniel smiled because he finally understood something beautiful. Success is not a destination. Success is a daily practice. And as long as he kept practicing, he would keep rising. He would keep improving. He would keep becoming the strongest version of himself. One day at a time. He stepped inside his home feeling grateful and unstoppable. Not because life had become easier, but because he had become stronger. And that is the real meaning of daily growth. It transforms not just your future, but the person you are today. Engaging hook. Part 8. There comes a time when a person stops asking for the road to get easier and decides to become stronger instead. This moment changes everything. It is the moment when you understand that life will not hand you success. You must grow into the kind of person who earns it. Part 8 begins at that exact moment, the moment when the fire inside you becomes greater than the pressure around you. Part 8. Rising above every pressure. The morning air felt cool and gentle as Daniel stepped outside with his notebook in hand. He had slept deeply the night before and woke up with a strange mix of excitement and calm. Something inside him felt different. It felt stronger. It felt ready. He walked toward the old maple tree behind his house, the same place where he had learned to be still, where he had learned to breathe, and where he had rebuilt his mindset. Today he felt drawn there for a new reason. He needed clarity. Not about the past and not about the future. He needed clarity about the person he was becoming. He sat down and opened his notebook to a blank page. For a moment he looked at the empty space and felt a familiar doubt appear in his mind. It whispered quietly like an old memory. Are you sure you can do this? Are you sure you are enough? But something powerful happened. For the first time, the doubt did not scare him. It did not control him. Instead, he smiled because he understood something he had never understood before. Doubt is not a warning. Doubt is a test. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly. The calmness around him reminded him that pressure was not his enemy. Pressure was his teacher. Diamonds are formed under pressure. So are strong people. And Daniel was learning to become one. After a few moments, he began writing. Not questions this time. Not fears. He wrote a powerful decision. I will rise above every pressure that tries to hold me back. Writing it felt like unlocking a new door inside him. A door to confidence. A door to courage. A door to his true identity. He stood up and walked through town toward the small business center where he had promised himself he would begin building his long-delayed dream. The dream he had once run from. The dream he had convinced himself he was not ready for. But today was different. Today he was not driven by fear. He was driven by purpose. On his way he passed the familiar places that held memories of who he used to be. The bakery where he once hid from responsibility. The bench where he would sit and worry about the future. The empty field where he had talked himself out of trying again and again. Now those places felt like reminders not of failure but of growth. He had walked through all those doubts and survived. And now he was walking forward with strength. He reached the building and paused before stepping inside. The air felt heavier here, almost as if the world was testing his courage again. But Daniel whispered to himself, the pressure you feel is proof you are stepping into something meaningful. Inside he found an empty room with a long wooden table near the window. He placed his notebook on it and took a seat. The room felt simple yet full of possibility. A room like this could someday become the place where new ideas are born, where success is shaped, where a new life begins. He opened his notebook and began planning. He wrote his goals, his steps, his deadlines, his tasks for the next week. Unlike earlier in his life, these notes were not fantasies or emotional excitement. These notes were commitments. They were promises. They were declarations of who he intended to become. At one point he looked out the window and saw a group of people walking by. Some looked tired. Some looked rushed. Some looked lost. And Daniel understood something profound. Most people are not defeated by life. They are defeated by pressure. Pressure from fear. Pressure from failure. Pressure from other people. Pressure from their own minds. But he was learning how to rise above it. Not by running away from it, but by mastering himself. Suddenly he remembered something Mrs. Turner, the librarian, once told him. The world does not test the weak. It tests the ones who have potential. Those words struck him deeply now. Pressure was not a punishment. It was a sign that he was capable of more. Hours passed as he planned and worked. At one point frustration rose inside him when an idea felt unclear. His old self would have quit. But the new Daniel breathed slowly and reminded himself that persistence is stronger than confusion. He kept going. Step by step. Idea by idea. And after a while clarity returned. As the sun began to set he closed his notebook and leaned back in his chair. He felt tired but proud. This was not the empty tiredness of wasted time. This was the powerful tiredness of meaningful effort. He walked back home with slow, thoughtful steps. The sky was glowing with orange and gold. The world looked peaceful. And Daniel felt peaceful too. He had not achieved everything yet. But he had become someone who no longer bowed to pressure. Someone who no longer crumbled when things felt heavy. Someone who no longer feared the weight of his own dreams. He sat on his porch watching the last light of day fade away. He opened his notebook one final time and wrote a single sentence. Pressure does not break me. It builds me. As he wrote the words, he felt an overwhelming sense of strength rise inside him. The kind of strength that comes from choosing growth every day. The kind of strength that comes from believing in yourself even when the world doubts you. The kind of strength that cannot be shaken because it comes from within. Before going inside, he whispered a quiet promise to himself. I will keep rising. I will keep growing. I will keep becoming stronger than every challenge that stands in my way. That night he fell asleep peacefully knowing he had taken another step toward becoming unstoppable. Not because life became easier, but because he had become braver than his fear and stronger than the pressure that once held him back. He had risen above it. And he would rise again tomorrow. Engaging Hook Part 9. Every great transformation reaches a moment when the person rising must face their biggest truth. You cannot grow into the life you want while holding on to the version of yourself that kept you small. Success demands a new identity. Confidence demands a new mindset. Purpose demands a new way of walking through the world. Part 9 begins at the moment Daniel realizes this truth and takes the first brave step into the person he was always meant to become. Part 9. Becoming the person your future needs. The morning light slipped quietly through Daniel's window as he woke with a feeling he could not name. It was not fear and it was not excitement. It was something deeper. A sense that life was moving forward and calling him with more force than ever before. He sat up slowly and breathed in the cool air of a new day. He walked to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of warm coffee. As he held the cup in both hands, he felt a strong thought rise inside him. You cannot reach your future with the habits of your past. That idea stayed with him as he stepped outside and walked toward the familiar maple tree behind his home. This tree had watched him rise from fear to clarity, from self-doubt to confidence. Today it would witness another step. A step into becoming someone his future could trust. He sat under the shade and opened his notebook. The same notebook that carried his struggles, his victories, his promises, and his breakthroughs. On a clean page he wrote a single question. Who must I become to achieve the life I want? He stared at the question for a long moment. It felt big. It felt heavy. But it felt right. Too many times in his life he had asked for things he was not prepared to carry. Too many times he waited for luck instead of building discipline. Now he wanted to earn his future, not wait for it. He wrote his answer slowly with intention. I must become a person who chooses growth every single day. As soon as the words were on the page, he felt something shift inside him. Growth is not a moment. It is a lifestyle. It is a promise you keep with yourself even on the days when motivation disappears. He continued writing. I must become a person who speaks truth to myself, who does not hide behind excuses, who does not run from responsibility. The more he wrote, the stronger his clarity became. He understood now that success was not something he achieved. It was something he became. With a steady breath he stood and walked toward town. Today he had planned to visit the community center where he had been offered a small part-time opportunity to help run workshops. It was not a big job. It was not glamorous. But it was meaningful. It was a place where he could share everything he had learned about discipline, clarity, purpose, and inner strength with others who needed it. As he walked, he noticed people going about their morning routines. Cars moved quickly along the street. Workers hurried into shops and offices. The world looked ordinary. Yet to Daniel everything felt different. He no longer felt like a passenger in his life. He felt like the driver. When he reached the community center, he was greeted by Ms. Cooper, a woman with a warm smile who believed in giving people second chances. We are glad you are here, Daniel, she said. I think you are going to help a lot of people. Daniel felt a quiet confidence rise in his chest. A few months ago he would have felt unworthy of such trust. Today he felt prepared. Not because he had everything figured out, but because he had finally figured out himself. Inside the center he walked into the small classroom where he would be helping later that day. The room was simple, with rows of chairs, a whiteboard, and sunlight pouring in through a wide window. Daniel walked slowly through the space, imagining the people who would sit here. People who were tired. People who were searching. People who needed hope. People who needed direction. He placed his notebook on the desk and looked around the room. A thought came to him with gentle force. If I am going to help others rise, I must first rise fully myself. He closed his eyes and let that thought settle deep inside him. He began preparing notes for the workshop. Not fancy ideas. Not complicated theories. Simple truths that he had lived. Truths that had rebuilt his identity. Truths like this one. The world changes for you when you change inside. And this one. If you want new results, you must become a new person. And this one. Your life will only grow as much as you grow. When he finished preparing, he walked outside to breathe fresh air. That was when he saw a young man sitting alone on the steps. His shoulders were slumped, and his hands were shaking slightly as he tried to calm himself. Daniel approached him slowly. You all right? He asked gently. The young man looked up, his eyes tired and defeated. I do not know what to do with my life, he said. Everyone expects something from me, but I do not even know who I am. Daniel sat down beside him. For a moment there was silence. A peaceful silence. The kind that allows truth to rise. Daniel spoke softly. I know what that feels like. I used to wake up every day confused, lost, and unsure of myself. But then I learned something powerful. When you do not know where to go, start by becoming someone you can rely on. Build yourself first. The path will appear after. The young man looked at him with surprise. Did it work for you? He asked. Daniel smiled. I am still on the journey. But I am not lost anymore. I know who I am becoming. That is enough to keep moving. The young man nodded slowly as if the words had settled into his heart. Daniel realized something important in that moment. Growth is not just for yourself. Growth is also for the people who will someday need your strength. Later that evening, Daniel returned home feeling peaceful and inspired. He opened his notebook once more and wrote a final message to himself. Become the person your future is waiting for. Because your future is ready for you. You just have to rise into it. He closed the notebook and felt a deep certainty settle inside him. He was no longer becoming someone new. He was becoming someone true. And tomorrow he would rise even higher. Engaging Hook Part 10. Every journey has a final step where all the lessons, all the struggles, and all the small victories converge. It is in this moment you see that persistence, faith, and disciplined action are not just words, but forces that shape reality. Part 10 reveals how determination and belief in yourself can transform fear into triumph and dreams into a living reality. Part 10. The victory of persistence. The sun rose quietly over the small town, spreading light on streets that had seen countless people rise and fall. Daniel sat by his window, his notebook open, pen in hand, and thought about the path that had brought him here. The path was long, challenging, filled with uncertainty, but every step had taught him a lesson no book or lecture ever could. He remembered the nights of doubt, the mornings when fear whispered that he was not enough, and the days when progress seemed impossible. Yet here he was, stronger, clearer, more focused than ever. He realized that the journey was never just about achieving a goal. It was about building a person capable of handling that goal. Daniel stood up and walked outside into the crisp morning air. The world seemed alive, every sound sharper, every smell richer, every movement meaningful. Today, he would meet with a group at the community center, a group of people who were looking for guidance, for inspiration, and for a way to take control of their lives. As he entered the room, he saw faces filled with hope and doubt, a reflection of himself just months ago. He smiled and began to speak. His voice carried authority, not because he had all the answers, but because he had lived through the struggles he now described. He spoke about the power of clarity. Success begins with a clear goal and a definite purpose. Without it, energy is wasted on distractions and fear. He told them that each day, every morning, they must declare to themselves who they intend to become and what they will achieve. Clarity transforms desire into action. Next, he spoke about persistence. Life will test you. It will push you down, challenge you, and tempt you to quit. But persistence is the bridge between dreams and reality. Every setback is a lesson, every failure is an opportunity, and every delay is preparation for a stronger, wiser, and more capable version of yourself. Daniel shared personal stories of late nights, mistakes, and moments when he wanted to give up. He explained that those moments were crucial. Without them, he would never have learned resilience, patience, and the value of disciplined action. The group listened intently, understanding that real growth required effort, discomfort, and unwavering commitment. He then spoke about belief. Belief is not blind optimism. Belief is a conscious choice to trust your ability to succeed, even when circumstances appear impossible. He reminded them that the mind is powerful, that thoughts influence actions, and actions determine outcomes. To believe in yourself is to plant the seeds for your own success. Afterward, he spoke about focus. Life offers endless distractions, opportunities, and choices. Focus is choosing the few things that matter most and dedicating your energy to them. He emphasized that focus turns intention into progress, and progress builds momentum. Each small, consistent action compounds into results beyond imagination. As the session ended, Daniel noticed the transformation in the room. Faces that had been uncertain now held spark and determination. They had absorbed not just words, but principles. They understood that success was not luck, inheritance, or chance. It was a result of action, belief, and persistence. Later, Daniel returned home and reflected on the series of events that had shaped his journey. He realized that everything he had achieved began with a simple decision to take responsibility for his life. That choice had led him to develop habits, to cultivate discipline, and to embrace the challenges that had once seemed impossible. He opened his notebook and wrote a final note for himself. Remember that every challenge carries an opportunity. Remember that every setback strengthens your resolve. Remember that you are capable of more than you know, and the only limits are the ones you accept. He closed the notebook and looked out the window at the fading light. He felt calm, fulfilled, and ready. Not because life was perfect, but because he had become the person his future demanded. Victory was not about a single moment. It was about a lifetime of decisions, actions, and growth. Daniel understood now that success is a journey, not a destination. It is measured not by what others see, but by the strength, resilience, and character you build along the way. Every person has the power to create their own path, to rise above fear, and to achieve greatness. As the evening fell, he whispered to himself with certainty, "I am the master of my destiny. I am the architect of my future. And the best is yet to come." If Daniel's journey inspired you, take action today. Subscribe to the channel for more motivational stories. Share this video to inspire someone else who needs guidance. Comment below with your biggest lesson from this series and how you plan to rise above your challenges. Every story has power, and every action counts.